The coffee cup shattered against the linoleum floor like Marcus Rivera's life had shattered 3 years ago in Kandahar. Hot liquid splashed across his prosthetic leg, the one that never quite felt right, never quite fit the way his old leg had. He didn't flinch at the scalding coffee. Physical pain had become background noise. What made him freeze wasn't the spill, it was the voice behind him, sharp as shrapnel. Maybe if you weren't taking up space where real people need to sit, this wouldn't have happened. Marcus had been a different man once. Before the IED, before the months of rehabilitation, before the nightmares that still visited him at 3 a.m. He'd been Staff Sergeant Rivera then, the guy his unit counted on, the one who could find humor in a sandstorm and hope in a firefight. Now he was just a 32-year-old veteran trying to make it through a Tuesday morning coffee run without falling apart. He'd chosen this particular Starbucks because it was usually empty at 9 a.m. Most people were already at work, already living their normal lives. Marcus envied them that normalcy more than he'd ever admit. He came here to practice being around people again, to work up the courage for job interviews, to remember what it felt like to be human. The barista, a college kid with kind eyes, had seen Marcus struggle with his wallet, his right hand still trembled sometimes, and had quietly comped his drink. Small kindnesses like that kept Marcus going. They reminded him that not everyone saw him as broken. The woman behind him was everything he wasn't, polished, confident, speaking loudly into her phone about stock options and quarterly projections. Designer heels clicked impatiently as she gestured, and one of those gestures had knocked his coffee right out of his unsteady grip. "Excuse me?" Marcus turned slowly, his cane helping him balance. The woman, blonde, mid-40s, probably made more in a month than he'd seen since his discharge, barely glanced at him. "You heard me," she snapped, still half focused on her phone call. "Can you hold on, Jennifer? There's a situation here." She looked Marcus up and down, her gaze lingering on his prosthetic, his cane, the slight tremor in his right hand. "Maybe don't loiter in coffee shops if you can't handle basic mobility. Some of us have real jobs to get to." The coffee shop fell silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Not anger, but something deeper. Recognition. This woman saw exactly what he saw when he looked in the mirror. A broken thing taking up space meant for whole people. "Lady, I'm a veteran. I lost my leg serving—" "Oh, please." Her laugh was ice cold. "You probably deserved your injuries. What did you do over there anyway? Harass innocent people? Terrorize families?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You don't get to play the hero card with me. I know what you people really did." The words hit harder than the IED blast that had taken his leg. Marcus stood there speechless, as 3 years of therapy and progress crumbled around him. Every doubt he'd ever had about his service, every nightmare, every moment of self-loathing came flooding back. But then he noticed the stranger. A man in his 60s had been sitting quietly in the corner, reading a newspaper. Now he was standing, and something about his posture, straight-backed, purposeful, made the air in the room change. His hair was silver gray, his clothes simple but well-maintained. When he moved toward them, it was with the measured pace of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that mattered. The stranger's eyes locked onto the woman, and Marcus saw something there that made his spine straighten. This wasn't going to end the way the woman thought it would. "Ma'am," the stranger's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the coffee shop turn to look. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." The woman turned, irritation flashing across her face. "And you are?" "Someone who thinks you should apologize to this young man." She laughed, sharp, dismissive. "For what? Telling the truth? Look, I don't know who you think you are, but my name is General James Harrison, United States Army, retired." The words fell like stones into still water. "And that young man you just insulted served under my command." Marcus felt the world tilt. General Harrison. He'd heard that name whispered with reverence in mess halls across Afghanistan. The ghost of Kandahar, they'd called him. The general who'd gone into Taliban territory to personally extract wounded soldiers. Who'd attended every funeral, written every letter to families, carried every loss like a stone in his chest. The woman's confidence flickered, but only for a moment. I don't care if you're the president. That doesn't change what these people did over there. These people? General Harrison stepped closer. You mean the people who volunteered to serve their country? Who left their families, their comfort, their safety to stand between you and those who would do you harm? The coffee shop had become a battleground. Other customers pressed closer, some pulling out phones. Marcus wished he could disappear, but his leg made quick exits impossible. He was trapped between his past and present, between a woman's cruelty and a general's protection. Staff Sergeant Rivera, General Harrison said, and Marcus straightened instinctively. Tell this woman about March 15th, up P1. Marcus's throat closed. March 15th, the day that changed everything. The day that haunted his dreams and filled his waking hours with guilt. Sir, I don't think... Tell her about the school. The woman rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. Another war hero story. Let me guess. You saved some children and everyone clapped? But Marcus was remembering now, the memories flooding back with painful clarity. The intelligence report, the IED factory hidden beneath a girls' school in Kandahar. The difficult choice, wait for evacuation and risk the bombs being used against civilians, or go in immediately with his small unit. We had intel about a bomb-making operation, Marcus said slowly, hidden under a school. 37 girls and 6 teachers were inside, being held as human shields. How convenient, the woman muttered, but some of her certainty was wavering. General Harrison's voice was steel. Staff Sergeant Rivera led a 4-man extraction team into that compound. They had to neutralize the threat while keeping every single civilian alive. Marcus closed his eyes. He could still smell the smoke, still hear the children crying. We got them out, all of them. But on the way out, I stepped on a pressure plate. My squad had to choose between leaving me behind or risking everyone's lives. He ordered them to leave him, General Harrison said quietly. Stayed behind to manually disarm the remaining explosives, saved 43 lives and lost his leg doing it. The woman's face had gone pale, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. That's just his side of the story. How do I know any of that's true? General Harrison pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward her. Marcus couldn't see what was displayed, but he watched the woman's expression transform from skepticism to shock to something that looked like horror. That's the after-action report, the general said, and those are the commendation letters from the parents of the children he saved. Would you like me to read them aloud? But the woman wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at the phone screen, her hand covering her mouth. When she looked up at Marcus, her eyes were filled with tears. Oh God, I thought... You thought what? General Harrison's voice was dangerously quiet. That this decorated veteran was lying about his service? That he deserved to have his leg blown off saving children? That he doesn't deserve the same basic human decency you'd show a stranger? The coffee shop was dead silent. Marcus felt exposed, raw, like every scar on his body was visible. He wanted to leave, but he also wanted to hear what came next. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of that woman's assumptions. That maybe he really was broken. Maybe he really didn't belong in normal society. The woman looked at Marcus, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, I have a daughter the same age as those girls you saved. The woman's name was Catherine Miller, and she owned a marketing firm downtown. She had a daughter named Emma, who was 12 years old and loved to paint. She'd lost her brother in 9/11 and had spent 20 years carrying anger like a poison in her blood. I'm not trying to excuse what I said, she told Marcus, her voice shaking. But when I think about soldiers, I think about Tommy. My brother, he died in the towers, and then we sent all these young men overseas, and I blamed all of you for not being there when we really needed you. Marcus understood toxic grief. He'd been carrying his own version for 3 years. Your brother didn't die because soldiers failed him, General Harrison said gently. He died because evil people decided to murder innocent civilians. The same kind of evil that held those school children hostage in Afghanistan. Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes. I know that, I do. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. She looked directly at Marcus. I said you deserved your injuries. That's the most horrible thing I've ever said to another human being. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Marcus studied her face. The genuine remorse, the pain she'd been carrying for 2 decades. He thought about the children he'd saved, about their parents' letters that he'd never read because the guilt was too heavy. He thought about his unit, who'd risked everything to come back for him despite his orders. He thought about the barista who'd comped his coffee, about General Harrison who'd appeared like an angel when he needed one most. I've spent 3 years thinking maybe you were right, he said quietly. Maybe I was just broken. Maybe I didn't deserve to take up space in normal people's lives. Catherine's face crumpled. No, no, that's not. But here's the thing, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. I saved those kids not because I'm a hero, but because that's what you do. When people need help, you help them. When children are in danger, you protect them. Not because you're perfect, not because you're unbreakable, but because someone has to. He looked around the coffee shop, at the faces watching him, at the barista who was crying behind the counter, at General Harrison who was nodding with pride. I'm not going to let your grief make me ashamed of my service anymore. And I'm not going to let my own grief make me ashamed of being human. Marcus extended his hand to Catherine Miller. But I will forgive you, because that's what you do too. 6 months later, Marcus Rivera walked into the offices of Miller Marketing with a confidence he hadn't felt since before Kandahar. Catherine had offered him a job, not out of guilt, but because his experience managing crisis situations in impossible circumstances made him exactly what her growing company needed. He still had nightmares. He still struggled with crowds and loud noises. His legs still ached on rainy days, and his hands still trembled when he was tired. But he no longer saw these as signs of brokenness. They were simply part of who he was now, a man who'd been tested by fire and had chosen to keep saving people, one difficult conversation at a time. The coffee shop had framed the newspaper article about their encounter. Local veteran's story inspires stranger to start foundation for military families. Catherine had used the viral attention from that morning to launch something bigger than either of them had imagined. As Marcus settled into his new office, he found a note on his desk. It was from Emma Miller, Catherine's daughter, thanking him for saving those children in Afghanistan and for forgiving her mother. At the bottom, she'd drawn a picture of a soldier helping a little girl climb over a wall. He pinned it right next to his Purple Heart citation. The stranger behind Catherine Miller that morning had been General Harrison, but the stranger Marcus had discovered was himself. Not the broken man he'd believed himself to be, but someone still worth saving, still worth loving, still worth taking up space in the world. Outside his window, morning coffee drinkers hurried past, living their normal lives. Marcus no longer envied them. He'd learned that normal was overrated, and that sometimes the most extraordinary thing you could do was simply refuse to let other people's pain become your own truth. He had work to do.